welcome, welcome to Core Volunteer Training. You've made it to the right place tonight. We are in luck to have CCL's Director of Operations, Amy Bennett, join us to give the overview of lobby training and practice meeting. I know that we've been talking a lot in our Climate Advocate training sequence about lobbying, and tonight's finally the chance where we get to run through a meeting and you'll see that role played and then get to practice yourself and partners. Give you a little bit more of an information about, like I said, Amy is our Director of Operations. Amy started her nonprofit work at actually an animal care facility in North San Diego County, and eventually expanded the volunteer ranks from several dozen to more than 1,200 volunteers during her tenure as manager of volunteer services. Amy got going volunteering for CCL many years ago and now trains volunteers and oversees appointment setting for Capitol Hill meetings for annual lobby days. And Amy knows that great strides can be made once you sit down with members of Congress and their staff, and finds that intensely rewarding and empowering for all of you to get that experience. Guiding volunteers literally and figuratively through the halls of Congress reminds her of what is possible when we are face to face with our elected officials. And that's really a wonderful way to begin our lesson tonight. Just as a quick check for our learning goals this evening, we're hoping 3 things will be achieved by the end of the lesson. One of which is all volunteers will be able to understand the planning process behind our meeting preparations with members of Congress and their staff. We also really want to demonstrate what this looks like. What does it mean to have a respect-based relational meeting, and how does that sound, as well as understanding why we take this approach in our own theory of change. And then lastly, really diving into helping prepare you for your own meeting, right? The goal of this isn't for us to show you how to meet, but for you to get that hands-on skill so you feel comfortable to jump right in and be a part of this movement and really gain that confidence in knowing where to go for additional support tools and resources. So with that, tonight's agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to have a chance to quickly review 1 minute what we covered in Climate Advocate training on this topic. Then we're going to jump right into meeting roles and defining more of what that looks like in the meeting. Amy is actually going to lead us in a role play lobby meeting. I'll be playing Congressman Doyle in the part in just a little bit. Then we're going to have a chance throughout that meeting to kind of take a pause and break the fourth wall to review key takeaways and get your input on what you're noticing. We'll go back and forth on that for a while, and then after the first third of the lesson, we'll have Q&A with Amy, and any of the questions that you have, come prepared to ask tonight. We'll have a chance for Amy to address those live time. And then we'll have a chance to really practice what you've seen in your own partner group. So with that, without any further ado, the last thing I'll just say before passing it off to Amy is that given we are going to have a chance to practice tonight in your own groups, I encourage everyone to take notes for anything that stands out to you this first third so that you can look back and refer to it when you wanted to put it in practice yourself. But before anything else, I'll pass it over to Amy to catch us up on a quick 15-minute review of really what a congressional meeting looks like and highlighting what it actually sounds like in our practice role play. Amy?
Thanks, Brett. Well, what this is really all about is our goal is building a relationship and moving your member of Congress up the ladder of support for carbon fee and dividend and basically climate solutions. So in relationships, what we look for is showing respect and appreciation, always appealing to the best in others, and being for something. Finding common ground is really our main approach. So what we look for is shared values and social connections, as well as finding places that we all care for. So again, finding that common ground in all 3 of those areas. Now, in the Climate Advocate training, we highlighted the story of Congresswoman Mia Love's transformation in joining the Climate Solutions Caucus, and she really demonstrated that one rule, that treat everyone, even those who disagree with us, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. So let's get to the nuts and bolts of lobbying team roles. So you're going to go in for a meeting. What does that look like? To begin with, the central role for each of our meetings with members of Congress is the leader, the lobby team member who empowers everyone to share and participate, especially the constituents. That's really important for the Congress member to hear from the constituent so that we build our capacity for this work. The leader may also facilitate, the CCL team leader may also facilitate the transitions in the agenda. If the leader's not the liaison, it usually is the liaison, but if not, the leader is responsible, whoever it is responsible for briefing the liaison after the meeting. And the leader also assigns the roles for the other CCL members before the meeting. So an analogy that we find kind of useful here is that of a conductor leading an orchestra. So the CCL team leader is there to manage the meeting but not dominate the meeting, to help everyone do a great job. The leader's not necessarily the one who talks the most, but empowers everyone to share and participate, especially the constituents. The leader might choose to be in charge of handling the transitions between different parts of the meeting, and the leader might keep the conversation on track and then also be the one who kind of wraps things up. The leader will help the team settle on kind of an appropriate supporting ask for the meeting, which is usually decided ahead of time, and make sure that everyone is on the same page with that before going into the meeting. So depending on the size of the lobby team, an individual may fill multiple roles. Sometimes there's 5 or 6 people in the meeting, but it could be less and it could be more. So everyone's encouraged to participate in the discussion, but you always want to give deference to the constituent wherever possible, because that's the person that congressman's paying attention or congresswoman is paying the most attention to. So one of the roles is that of the appreciator, the lobby team member who shows an appreciation for the member of something that the member of Congress has recently accomplished. And if possible, that should be the constituent. And of course, something that's really heartfelt and a sincere appreciation. Then there's the timekeeper. That's the lobby team member who at the beginning of the meeting asks how much time does the member have for the meeting, or the staffer if you're meeting with a staffer, and then signals to the team when there are just maybe a few minutes, 5 minutes remaining, so there's time to actually wrap it up. Then there's the note taker, the lobby team member who takes notes, or we refer to them also as meeting minutes. And if possible, the note taker should be an experienced volunteer, and this person should be able to follow the thread of the conversation, specifically capturing what's said by the member of Congress or the staffer. And on the same day, those notes, we ask that the minute taker or note taker submits those notes online. There's a form online that we always give you a link to. Now, the discussion, all of the lobby team members are encouraged to take a role in that, and especially, again, the constituent. Then another role is the asker. The asker is the lobby team member who presents Citizens Climate Lobby's purpose and the ask. And if possible, this should be a constituent who has a strong grasp of our policy and its wider implications and the ripple effects of that policy. The asker leaves our one-page primary ask behind. Then there's someone we refer to as the deliverer, the team member who's responsible for bringing constituent letters, postcards, written endorsement letters from community leaders to the meeting. These are very powerful representations of political will in the district. So that's the deliverer. Then there's someone who is assigned follow-up. And this lobby team member sends follow-up meeting materials and a thank you card. If the person doing the follow-up is not the liaison, then that follow-up person should coordinate the follow-up with the liaison after the meeting, because the liaison wants to be involved in that. A couple of others that we don't have up here could include a photographer. It's always fun to assign someone to pull out their camera and take a picture of the team with the Congress member or with the staffer. Of course, they're very used to having that done, and often will pose right behind a flag or the door that has their name on it or something like that. Then another kind of unofficial role might be the observer or listener, and that's the team member designated to kind of put aside the agenda for outcomes and really just be listening for the underlying needs that they hear in the meeting. If they hear something is missing or sounds like a place to get more understanding, they ask about it. They find that opportunity to clarify things to bring a fuller understanding, and that really helps the meeting. So, and now to the meeting. The meeting outline is pretty simple. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not too complicated. So at the beginning of the meeting, you want to thank them for their time, find out how much time they do have, introduce yourselves, show appreciation, state our purpose, and deliver constituent communications such as the endorsements and letters, and then present our ask very briefly. Then the middle is the heart of the meeting. This includes the discussion, the active listening, hearing their concerns, listening for values, shared values and common ground, and overcoming obstacles and executing your strategy to move them forward. And at the end of the meeting, you want to see if they're willing to commit to our ask or present the supporting ask if you don't feel they're ready for the full ask. So make sure to include asking, with whom do you work with across the other side of the aisle? That's a really great question to include, and also ask, what could Citizens Climate Lobby be doing more of in the district to make it easier for you, Mr. Congressman or Ms. Congresswoman, to support carbon fee and dividend? So those two questions are really key to ask and get their answers on. And then finally, just confirm what follow-up items are needed. So after the meeting, we want to, depending on if your meeting's in the district or in Washington, D.C., you want to step away from the office, maybe down the hall, or maybe it's in the car when you're getting ready to drive home. If it's in the district, you want to review your notes and make sure that you have a full understanding of what happened in the meeting. So the minute taker may have missed something or needs some clarification on something. Then be sure that someone is assigned to submit those meeting minutes online if the minute taker can't do it. And then also confirm any follow-up and who's doing the thank you note. So there's kind of an overview. So what we're going to do now is demonstrate an actual meeting. So I'll narrate the demonstration and we'll stop at certain points to kind of debrief and let you know what happened and explain things a little further. I'll play the meeting leader, who also happens to be a constituent of Congressman Doyle, and Brett's going to play Congressman Doyle. And so what we'll do is we'll go through the meeting, the beginning, the middle, and the end of an initial meeting with a member of Congress, maybe someone that CCL hasn't met with before. Our meeting is with Congressman Doyle. As I said, he's from Kansas 1st District. And our agenda is pretty broad on the first meeting because it's the first meeting. We want to establish trust, we want to show respect and appreciation, and feel each other out. This first meeting is the start of a long-term relationship rather than a one-time event. So of course we want to advise them on our policy and make that ask, but tell them what we're doing, is creating political will for them back in their district. But we'll need to be prepared to do a lot of listening so we really learn how to move this member forward in future meetings that we do have. So here we go with the start of the meeting. Well, first of all, Congressman Doyle, we want to acknowledge how busy you are and how appreciative we are that you're able to carve out some time for us today.
Well, it's great to see you both, so engaged in the political process. I know you have come halfway across the country to visit with me, so I'm really glad to meet you. It's an honor.
Well, thank you, Congressman. We know it's a busy day for you too. So how much time do you have for this meeting today?
Well, I have a committee meeting in about 20, so that means I can give you 15. You would think they would have given me an office somewhere close to where my committee meets, but I'm stuck over here in Rayburn, while Longworth in the building over there is where I actually have to get to. I guess that's how the government works.
Well, I guess you do a lot of walking in DC. Well, my name is Amy Bennett, and I'm a constituent of yours living in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm a school teacher. I'm here today because I'm worried about the kind of world the kids I teach will grow up in, and I want to do my part to make it as safe as possible for them.
Oh, well, Amy, I served for 16 years in the Kansas legislature, fighting for school children and seniors. I believe government should exercise its powers to look after our most vulnerable citizens, and I admire you for devoting your life to educating our kids. I know it must be especially difficult right now for you with this federal government trying to impose its will on all of our local school districts.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Congressman. We'd like to start by telling you how much we admire your work to protect seniors from identity theft scams. I have an older parent, and your work means I have one less thing to worry about as she ages.
Well, thank you for that. It's important for me that all Kansans know that if they work hard, they'll be able to retire comfortably.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, since we just have a few minutes, Congressman, let me briefly tell you why we're here, and then we'd like to hear your thoughts on our policy proposal. Our purpose is to create the political will for a livable world. Back home in Lawrence, we're working to create the political will, the space that we know you'll need to support our policy. Over the past couple of months, we've gathered letters and postcards from your constituents and endorsements from community leaders in Lawrence. Here's a stack of letters from your constituents and a written endorsement on the policy of carbon fee and dividend from the Lawrence Regional Medical Center. Our ask today is for you to introduce legislation that puts a fee on fossil fuels and returns the net revenue to American households. Although, seeing how this is our first meeting with you, how about if we start hearing your thoughts on climate and energy policy? So, okay, let's pause the meeting here and debrief a little bit. So we started by thanking him for the meeting and asking how much time we had, introduced ourselves, showed an appreciation, delivered our purpose, our letters, our postcards, our endorsements, and we briefly presented our ask. Notice how quick that was. Every meeting is different, so we have to adapt to each situation. For example, this might be your 10th meeting, so that formal introduction might not seem necessary. Or maybe the member says that they only have 10 minutes, so then you've got to cut some of this out. We're demonstrating a suggested outline, but once the conversation starts, you'll need to kind of read the room and demonstrate being adaptive. And so by being adaptive, you just basically need to perceive and understand what's happening in the moment and be able to react to changes kind of as they happen. Being adaptive means you're not only listening to the words being said, but also the tone, the body language, all of that. So we need to kind of remain flexible and practice good listening and good observation skills. So one thing I didn't do was go for the bait to go off topic when Congressman Doyle had some strong thoughts on the federal government's role in local education. So that was where I was showing we stay on topic. We only have 15 minutes, and we'll talk more about this in Lobbying 401 when you take that class. Also, note that the ask is very direct and clear and specific. Our primary ask will always be the same, so it's not worth it to test the waters here with something else. The worst possible outcome is to have us leave and them not know why we were there. So don't let that happen. Get the primary ask out there early, then they know what CCL is all about. And I also just note how I check in when use the words carbon fee and dividend. Even though it's your 10th, might be your 10th meeting with the member, recognize that these offices meet with a lot of people, and refreshing them with just a couple of sentences on the policy detail is really great to avoid any potential confusion. Again, you're just saying, just reminding them politely, this is carbon fee and dividend, a revenue neutral price on carbon. That way, you're all in the same place for the discussion and they're not confusing it with any other policy.
All right, so you had asked a question, and here's my response. Well, I can't say that I hear much about the need to do something about climate or global warming. I think that the general mood in Kansas is that we have a strong wind sector, but that wind industry needs to begin competing on its own without the need for subsidies or tax credits, and that's why I supported a gradual elimination of the production tax credit. So when it comes to energy policy, Amy, you can put me in the all of the above energy category. Regardless of climate change or this so-called global warming, we need American energy independence. We need to stop propping up one industry at the expense of another. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-environment. I mean, I've been portrayed as being anti-environment, but we need to get this economy going, and these regulations are choking small businesses. The people of Kansas sent me here with a clear message: stop the federal government's overreach.
So what I'm hearing you say is that both the economy and the environment are important to you, not one or the other. Is that a fair assessment, Congressman?
Sure. I mean, a lot of negative things are said about me because I'm putting jobs first, but this environmental agenda isn't good for business.
Well, we can certainly appreciate being unfairly labeled. I mean, we're often portrayed as being anti-business, but really nothing could be further from the truth. We, just like you, want the economy and the environment to flourish. Have you been briefed about our carbon fee and dividend proposal?
I know my aide has reviewed it in detail, Amy, but why don't you tell me a little bit about it yourself?
Well, what we're proposing is, and then I would go on to explain carbon fee and dividend is a revenue neutral price on carbon with 100% of the net revenues returned. And I would go ahead and just take a few moments to explain this and ask, how does this sound in comparison to the regulations sought by the administration?
Well, let me be clear, Amy. The administration nowadays is definitely something that may actually need a little bit focus, but regulations kill jobs here in Kansas. And for what? We impose additional costs on Americans, and I don't see how these rules will stop global warming. But I do understand one thing: increasing costs isn't good for business or consumers.
When I first became concerned about climate, I struggled with that as well. Um, could I tell you what I found out about the dividend aspect of our proposal that put me at ease?
Sure, put me at ease too.
Knowing your economic background, I think you'll appreciate what we've learned. What's really interesting about our policy is that by returning the net proceeds to household, the dividend actually has a stimulative effect on job creation and the economy. So job creation occurs when people get a dividend check each month and they spend it. And you know as well that anyone that 70% of the American economy is tied to consumer spending. And healthcare is a large slice of that. So employers like Lawrence Regional and Children's Hospital stand to benefit from people having more money in their pocket to spend. So, okay, let's pause right there again and recap that middle part. So notice what we didn't do here. We didn't correct him or make the congressman take him to task for his position on climate or any other statements. It's obvious that we see things differently, but why start with something that'll put us into a situation where one of us has to be right and the other has to be wrong? So instead, doesn't it make more sense to listen and ask additional questions so that we can start to find that common ground and build that relationship from there? So notice how many questions were asked. What we're trying to do is draw out more information so we can discover where we have that common ground and also where we can discover misconceptions. Notice how we asked for permission to proceed. Would you like to take a look at that now? Would you like to hear more about this or that? And by asking permission, that opens the door. In trying to find common ground, we can find a way that works for both Congressman Doyle and us. It's clear that he doesn't hold the same belief we do regarding global warming. I heard Brett chuckling there, playing his role as Congressman Doyle. And we can tell this when he said so-called global warming. So he's already revealed to us how he feels. So I went ahead and moved on to finding common ground. It's also pretty evident from the responses to my explanation of carbon fee and dividend and my question that Doyle is pretty fixated on costs, not the dividend. But rather than explicitly drawing attention to that misconception at this point, I explained how the dividend would benefit the local hospitals, the benefit to his constituency. So again, I didn't put him into a situation where he was a loser for not listening or understanding, but rather restating his statements to enable him to open up to listen further. Keep in mind, this may not be a meeting where we're going to try to change his mind right there and then, but rather focus on developing some trust and showing our listening skills. Each meeting is unique, and after your first meeting with an office, you'll often have a specific agenda or points you want to cover from previous meetings. But don't be afraid to say, you know what, that's an important issue you raise. I'd like to gather some more information from you. Can we talk about that, what a transition to clean energy economy would look like with a carbon fee and dividend at our next meeting? So therefore, you're setting up the next meeting at the same time. You're letting him know you were really listening. Let's demonstrate how to wrap up a meeting. The meeting can draw to an end in a couple of ways. Either the timekeeper is looking at her watch and notices we're 5 minutes from the end of the allotted time, or we begin picking up some body language clues, signaling the meeting is over. The member himself might be, or a staffer, if you're meeting with a staffer, might be looking at his or her watch, or they're closing their notebook. That's a real signal. When either of these things happen, or when you've got that 5 minutes left, it's time to close it down. So don't try to squeeze in more discussion. There's going to be another meeting. Part of our follow-up will include asking whether or not they'd be open to a meeting again on the fee and dividend, on impacts on small business and regulations. So we could ask, one of the things we could ask is, could we ask to have a next meeting where we discuss more of your concerns about carbon fee and dividend and the impacts on small business and also regulations? We have several studies we'd like to share with you that you might find valuable. Would you be interested in how the carbon fee and dividend affects your district by income quintile? So we're saying that we basically have some resources for it. Congressman Doyle, I see that we're nearing the end of our time, so I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to introduce a bill that puts a fee on carbon and returns the net proceeds to American households.
I think it's a novel approach you have, but I have a few reservations. And besides yourselves, this is not a topic that's important to my constituents.
I understand. This is our first meeting after all, so we promise to go home and keep working on the grassroots support. So that when we meet again, we'll have more letters and endorsements for you. Would you be willing to sit down with your staff and review our policy proposal and get back to us with a little more specifics on what's preventing you from introducing our policy?
I will do that. It seems like I got the easier task. If you're going to speak with folks back home, then may I recommend you speak with Mayor Rawlings? Being a former utility CEO, he's somebody I listen to regarding energy.
Absolutely. Thank you for that recommendation. As we said earlier, we're trying to make it easier for you to support our policy. So when we make an appointment to see, so we'll go ahead and make an appointment to see the mayor. I'm going to leave this one-page ask with you. And how would you like for me to follow up with additional materials in the future?
You can follow up with Joanna over email.
Great. Congressman, thank you. One last thing before we leave. Would you mind telling us with whom you enjoy working with on the other side of the aisle?
As you know, I'm new, and there are a lot of ill feelings around here, so I haven't had the opportunity to bond with many Democrats.
That must be frustrating. But is there one you've gotten to know a little bit?
Well, Congresswoman Pelosi and I sat next to each other on the plane the other day, and she's not as bad a person as she seems on TV.
Okay. So that's the end of our demonstration for the initial meeting. Let's switch gears and discuss one final consideration and then take time for some questions. For many of you on the line, this might be your first meeting. As a result, you might feel somewhat nervous or unqualified. So it's really important to acknowledge that, but also move through it because you have just as much right to be there as any one of the constituents in the district, and your voice matters. So in order to help alleviate those feelings a little, keep in mind that another important meeting element is play or playfulness. So we're in the relationship business. That's one of our strengths. So never underestimate the power of injecting a little bit of personality and fun with a staffer or the Congress member. Let's say you find out the staffer grew up on a ranch. Go ahead and ask if he knows how to wrangle cattle. You know, if your member of Congress went to a rival school, then bring it up in a jovial way. Another thing you could do is ask them about the pictures or the displays in their office. These are things they're normally quite proud of, or they wouldn't be up on the walls. And if this is your first meeting with a staffer, ask them to introduce themselves at the beginning of the meeting and tell you a little bit about themselves. These personal and playful moments will help build a stronger relationship and make the meeting more fun for everyone and a little more relaxed. Mm-hmm. So just a little final point on the importance of practice. Basically, it does build our reputation. We're quite known on the Hill for being the appreciative group, the group that goes into meetings and Congress says, oh no, I'll let my next meeting wait. I want to talk with you some more. So even though they might say they have 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes those meetings stretch into 30 or 40. It's because of our reputation. And the practice also demonstrates that you respect them. It allows you to be very present. You already know the stuff. You've practiced it. It's in there. It develops trust in your team, and it impresses who you're working with.
Great.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to add, Amy, I guess, before we kind of transition to our final third for the evening's core volunteer training?
Let's go for it.
Great. Well, feel free to add to this, but just a quick review. I know many of you on the call tonight have already kind of been through this, but you know, we have the final 18 minutes to break out into our partners as usual. On Amy's note, we'll actually have the chance to practice, you know, to put this in action in live time tonight with your partner, just as we've demonstrated. So before we talk about the activity, you know, a quick review of how and why we have this final section. The purpose of our partners really is threefold: to set and specific measurable goals, both in the short term tonight, you know, hopefully, as well as some stretch goals. You know, what's your plan after tonight? What are you going to do to encourage this own development for this sphere of knowledge after tonight's webinar? We want to provide you a support system. You know, climate advocacy is a hard, it's a hard slog. So you want to have people there for you. And I think this really allows you to lean in and be supported in the larger community and celebrate together too when we do have accomplishments, and really have this framework to provide each other. So again, tonight's action plan, we share our name, email, chapter, if you're willing, with your partner so that you guys can follow up after tonight's conversation, check in a week, see how that plan's been going. It's great for you to maybe have a chance just to break the ice, share your biggest takeaway or any remaining questions that you'd like to have answered that you're hoping tonight would address that didn't get to. And then we want to dive in specifically to tonight's specific action. So again, a little reminder, we're actually kind of going again off of this bit.ly-CCL partners link. That's where you can fill out a link, and I'll be happy to follow up with you as well. If you do that, you can kind of indicate that you'd like to have a little support. And what we're going to do tonight is actually break out and practice what it might look like in your own first meeting. So your situation is similar to what you saw with Congressman Doyle's office. You will both have turns to play roles. Your own self as a constituent of your own district, as well as your partners, being your member of Congress. So we recommend that you take a few minutes ahead of jumping in to frame your key points, walk through with your partner about what you'd expect your member to act like, or who they'll be representing if you happen to know. If not, that's fine too. They can just assume whatever persona they adopt. And then really here's the kind of main focus. So we'll be doing that for 5 minutes, and then we'll actually have a chance to switch. And a quick review of some of those suggestions I think would be helpful. And if you'd like, I can cut and paste these as well into the chat window. That way that you can kind of see those even when you go to the actual breakout rooms. I know that's kind of hard. So first off, introductions. Remember to connect as a fellow resident of wherever you are. Ask them to say a little bit more about themselves. Make sure to really emphasize the ability to just have that kind of bond, and listen for values as you have that chance that Amy demonstrated so well, so we can establish where to build out that common ground from. Make sure as you make your primary ask to use the language that you've worked on. Last week, if you were on the call with our carbon fee and dividend lesson with Joe, you began to put your own words to address what you think perhaps your member of Congress's concerns might be for this policy. For example, Congressman Doyle was concerned about regulations and small business protection, right? So connecting on how fee and dividend will empower our Main Street economy, or provide a predictable price signal to allow innovation to get to work would really help that connection. Just thinking off the top. Again, then after you have this primary ask, the important thing that Amy continued to emphasize is the importance of questions, to not just kind of talk at them the whole time, right? And so have the chance to really dive in, to draw out more information and find out what they don't or do understand about our policy. And as you advance into addressing their concerns, make sure to keep practicing asking that permission to proceed. Would you be interested if I shared a little bit more? Do you have time for us to dive into this? Asking for permission to proceed prepares them to hear what we have to say. They're actively engaged in choosing to be a part of that. And then lastly, at the end of that follow-up meeting, we replace the question, with whom do they work with across the aisle? You can still use that if you'd like, but I really like emphasizing that second one, which is, what could we be doing more of in the district to make it easier for you to support our policy? I think that's the million-dollar question that really encourages them to think about networks that we can tap into back home, who they listen to, who we should be meeting with, who we could bring to the next meeting. And then, of course, we always thank them for their time and are debriefed as well. So in each role you play, you will embody the identity of the character as best you can. Now, it's going to be a bit goofy feeling at first, but feel free to raise your hand for any questions or help. I can float between all the rooms. And before jumping into that, what I'd like to just do real quick is just have a chance to show everyone, again, on the Learning Center after tonight, you can click here or down here, and this is where you can find the recording if you want to go back or share this lesson with anyone else. It should be posted by tomorrow. And I also really wanted to thank Amy. Here's Amy's contact information. Here's my contact information. Here's where to find the actual link to Core Volunteer Training if you wanted to put that in your search browser. We really appreciate all of your time. Amy, especially, thank you for making time to help walk us through this lobby training. And thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.